So I'm going to show, again, just really the very, very beginning of the bombing of Osage. And again, this is Tony wrote and narrated. And I'll talk in a second about what that means to bring hearing. Okay. I'm just trying to see if these are just play. Screen back screen.
Extra whole other, and it needs a security code to access.
What about it? No, I think that's the screen. Or is it? I was just saying, I wasn't accusing you of like not trusting people.
Well, you never know, we might rebel.
Right.
That's the question.
Right. Okay, how do we do this?
The presentation of this program is made possible by the Pennsylvania Public Television Network and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
It's not like downtown where they have a lot of stores and tall buildings. You could tell that you're going back into another neighborhood.
We love the park. We live right near Cops Creek. And we go down there and have a picnic and things like that.
I mean, I run in and out of everyone's house, but we're all neighbors and we know each other.
On 60th Street, you could go anywhere along the street and buy whatever you wanted. They had all different types of stores. You didn't have to go into Center City for anything.
Like you would come past 58th and Walnut and come past Sayre Junior High, you'd say, oh, I know where I'm at now. You know, you come past 60th Street, oh yeah, I know where I'm at and everything. You know, the houses, the row homes, you know, up and down the block, you would notice that it's just changed into a different neighborhood.
When you're part of a community, at home in the rhythms and the rituals of a place, you don't imagine that you're living on the edge of hell.
Sunday morning, we knew something was going to happen because they said we'd have to vacate and they were going to turn off the gas and the electricity.
May 12th, they called me up in the morning and said, this is the city police department. We would like you to vacate your premises by 10 o'clock tonight because we have reason to believe there's going to be gunfire in your neighborhood. And I said, by who? And they said, from the news members around the corner. So I told them, now wait 1 minute. This is Mother's Day and I'm not going any place.
And no sooner we got finished breakfast, I heard this bang, 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 shooting. And the ladies downstairs started hollering, hit the floor. And I hit the floor because it sounded like they were coming straight through the house. And then the only thing I could think about was my baby was upstairs in the room. So I crawled up the steps, drug him out the bed, into the closet. You know, I just kept going, then it stopped for a while. Then it started back up. I mean, it was like war.
I saw when our house was caught. The first house on the south side, they get caught. And that's the guys in our house was on fire. And it was very depressing. It was just like a movie or story. You just couldn't believe it, you know, just happening right before your eyes. And I said, I don't believe this, you know. How you do, just stand there and look and to think you're just so helpless.
My heart is very heavy. I feel for those people. I loved each and every one of them that was murdered. My blood, as well as the children who was not my blood. But I felt that they were my children because I had been so close to them through the years when I was a MOVE member. They stayed at my house. I stayed with them in Virginia. And It's just hard.
Mother's Day, like so many historical precedents, was set in Philadelphia, 1907. The following year, the tradition of wearing carnations, red flowers for the living, and white. Mother's Day, May 12, 1985, the Cobbs Creek community is put on red alert. The following day, May 13th, armed troops occupy the neighborhood to evict members of the organization known as MOVE.
Why you gotta hurt? There's kids in there. You tell my children in there all day, all night. Why you gotta hurt the kids? Think about the children. Think about the children.
What industry is this, your home, a blazing smokestack belching up your prized possessions, neighborhood of free fire zone, and people killed? Incident. Official leads for 11 people dead, 61 homes destroyed, 100 other houses wrecked, 250 residents made refugees and relocated on a wildlife preserve. The dismemberment of a community, the relation of a people to a place, ruptured. The original people who blessed the land were the Lenni Lenape, or the Delawares, eldest nation of the Algonquin Confederacy. They called the area Kakadikom, place of the wild geese. They called it home. Others would come to rename it Carcoin Creek, Cobbs Creek, would claim it with their guns, their plows, and their dreams. Africans came too, captive, but with dreams of their own.
The major migration started, of course, with the Underground Railroad. That was the biggest, largest migration by blacks in the United States, and Philadelphia played a very important part of it. However, the early blacks first came to the city with the Dutch and the Swedes as early as 1639, and later with the English. Blacks primarily lived all over the city. If you check some of the early city directories, those are the directories that indicated what type of labor the people did, what occupation or where they lived and such. You will find people, black people in the Northern Liberties area, Frankfurt, Southwest Philadelphia.
Movement. The continual struggle to establish autonomous communities. By 1800, the pattern is set. Runaways and free blacks moving first to already established neighborhoods, often receiving a cool welcome from the old Philadelphia Negro. Then mutual economic and political interdependence acknowledged, black working class and black bourgeoisie settle in, then split off to spread out to less congested areas to build again. Riots and rumors of riots. The Cobbs Creek Mill District, birthplace for Pennsylvania industries, is caught in the middle. Lawless posses crossing its borders and the all-out militia in hot pursuit. Race war, worker uprisings, temperance leagues clashing with bootleggers, the Know-Nothing Party against the foreign-born, against Catholics, posses against deputized constables. Out of the riots of the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, the Mill District demands the consolidation of municipal power and services.
So the strategy was, okay, let's put this in its broadest context, and let's also put violence, sort of political, sort of state-controlled violence in its broadest context, rather than making it a nominal news event. Let's try to do that, and maybe we can understand it in a different kind of way. And it also, the broadcast was extraordinarily important, but also the screenings in the Cops Creek area were really important too, as this kind of discussion and the beginning of a kind of dialogue. I was working at HYY during the day, and then evenings and weekends I had sort of started Scribe. I guess I started Scribe in the early, like 1982. And so by then, Scribe was beginning to develop, and Tony began working at Scribe really as pretty much of a full-time instructor, really for the last, she died in 1995, for like the last 10 years of her life. And what would happen is community groups would come to us and say, hey, this thing is going on. Can you document it for us? And we'd say, okay. And so around this time, and I hope this DVD will play. I had a little bit of a problem with it earlier. Oftentimes, so community groups would come to us and ask us to document something as a way of furthering their work. And we would try to do it. Around that time, probably one of the an issue that a lot of people were organizing around was really issues of housing and homelessness. This was kind of the 1988, 89, I guess that was Reagan, Bush, is that me?
Bush.
No. Oops, sorry, I apologize. Okay. So we found ourselves doing a lot of work around housing and homelessness. So one of the pieces, so at one time I got a call from somebody from the National Union of the Homeless saying, this event is going on, can you document it? So I'm just going to show this really, really quickly. And hopefully it will play. If not, I'll tell you about it. Philadelphia up until 1985. It's interesting. The day of the bombing, 1985, I believe, and I hope this is not a Brian Williams fumble memory thing, but I believe it was the same day that the groundbreaking took place for One Liberty Place, which was the first building built taller than City Hall, because there was this gentleman's agreement or whatever, that no building would be built taller than City Hall. And then finally, in the early 80s, there was a feeling that Philadelphia would never blossom unless it started building skyscrapers. So One Liberty Place, the ground was dug in 1985. So by 1987 or 88, when we made this piece, the building was already up. And I hope and pray this will behave. Looks bad. This was originally shot on the 1/4 inch and was gone through like 12 generations, and this DVD has been on my windowsill. It was branded, actually. Well, the idea behind this, while this is playing, was... all right, so much for that one. The idea behind this was... So we were doing all these, documenting all of these mobilizations and events going on. And what I soon realized, because, Scribe was not, there was no money changing hands really, and I wasn't getting, I'm not a news servant, you know what I mean? I can't be, and so, but what I realized we could do a better job of doing, because Scribe really began teaching individuals how to create projects. But what I realized we could do is work with community groups and figure out a way to teach a community group how to use film and video as a way to talk to their constituency. And so yes, we would help them make one work, but in the process, two things would happen. One is that they would have this work that would better enable them to reach their constituency. And two, they actually would have skills. And in many ways, this was very much part of kind of an international community media movement that was going on. Although not all of us were aware of each other, but I think, when the technology became available, I think many people soon realized, okay, this is another way that we can use this technology. So we began a number of programs to teach members of community groups how to use film and video. The first one was something called the Community Visions Program, and each year we work with about 4 groups. We put 2 filmmakers, usually for about 10 months. So it really, because we weren't just making quick and dirty. We really wanted the groups to gain some solid skills. And we also wanted the works aesthetically to be something that they could be proud of. Because the reality is, we all live in the same media universe for the most part. We all can have access to the same movies, we can see things on TV. And so why should community media look like, nickel and dime cheap stuff when, although not trying to necessarily replicate, commercial TV formats, but we also wanted to make sure that, it was clear, people could hear it, people could follow the story. So we created the Community Visions Program as a way of working with community groups. And then a little bit later, the program that we have been running, that we started in, I guess around 2000, the beginning of this century, in 2002, the first one was actually finished in 2004. It was a series called the Precious Places Community History Project, which was the idea was, well, a number of things came together. So you have, cities sort of on the decline being the story of the latter half of the 20th century. And in the beginning of the 21st century, suddenly cities become valuable property. Like we're talking about, $300 apartments in New York, and which was outrageous in 1970. But suddenly, real estate becomes this hot commodity, and oftentimes the people living in areas with low real estate are people of color, people who don't have a lot of money. And so, as the real estate market began to heat up at the beginning of the 21st century, developers were coming in, universities were buying huge tracts of land, the city was bulldozing land to make it more attractive to developers, and so there was a great deal of insecurity in a lot of neighborhoods. So the Precious Places Project was a way to say, this neighborhood it may look like a dump to you, but this is where I live, and there's a history here. And so we would work with groups to find some public space. It could be a park, it could be a house, it could be a tree, it could be a billboard that's been there forever, that in some way holds the community's memory. And that became this device for creating these works. So we've done about 70 of them so far, including a number of them in Camden and Chester, Pennsylvania, which is just west of the city, and a number of them in Delaware County, which is also in the west of the city. And I am going to show, this is a piece about Fair Hill Cemetery, which is in North Philadelphia, and hopefully, I think this one will behave. And again, you know, these works, most of these works have been, we do a lot of community screenings. Some of them are on the internet. WHYY has broadcast the series. Okay, let me just see if I can get this.
I live up there. I live up there. I live up the street. I live right there. I live up there. I live up there.
300 years ago, William Penn, who founded Pennsylvania, gave this land to George Fox, who had founded Quakerism. Fox, in turn, gave the land to local neighbors and Quakers for use as a Quaker meeting house, a way station between Center City, Philadelphia, and Germantown, a garden, and a burial ground. All sorts of famous Philadelphians are buried here, including Lucretia Mott, who's one of the mothers of American feminism, and Robert Purvis, an African-American who's known for being one of the instrumental founders of the Underground Railroad in this area.
Well, Lucretia Mott was a person committed to equality for blacks and for women, and she spent her whole life struggling on those two issues. When she saw injustice, she felt inspired to do something about it.
Robert Purvis worked for the anti-slavery movement. He started the Vigilant Association of Philadelphia, which we would call the Underground Railroad. What he wanted to do was to help runaway slaves. He wanted to help the runaway slaves get to a safe place, because what happened was a lot of slaves migrated to Philadelphia knowing that they had the Quakers as well as Robert Purvis on their side.
By the early 1900s, the surrounding area started being developed for housing, and soon the city grid encompassed the surrounding blocks.
Then my grandmother lived on Auburn Street, and she was a single parent. She raised my father alone, and she worked in one of the lace factories. People of her generation, she would be like 100 if she were alive now, but people of her generation, a lot of them in this neighborhood, worked in the mills and the factories.
We had a candy factory that was right here on 8th and Somerset. And all along Lehigh Avenue, they had so many factories that dealt with lace and curtains and you name it, everything. As time went on, these companies were moving down south, people losing their jobs, people losing their value. It came to a point where there were littering and there was mattresses and people doing so many awful things in there, drugs and hiding stuff, and it was just awful.
You had dogs fighting, you had guys shooting cracks, it was full of people 24 hours a day. The burial ground was really awful. I mean, it was weeds up to the top. Drug dealer was in there shooting up. I mean, it was just terrible. Abandoned cars, trash. It was just ugly.
en el pasillo, muertos, cada rato disparando a la gente, eso era triste.
There used to be death everywhere. There used to be dead bodies on the ground, and it was real sad.
It was a huge challenge to bring it back to a place of peace and green. We just got started clipping, removing trash, removing debris. We met once a month and just hauled out the trash, hauled out the debris.
The cemetery was a disgrace. It was a place where people used drugs and where the prostitutes engaged in their trade. When I came back here as the captain of 25th District, Peaches was already moving to change the neighborhood.
Actually, 7 years ago, I was pregnant, very huge. I would come up to the corner every day, and I'd be like struggling up the corner. I would tell her, can you please get off my corner? I'm tired of seeing y'all. I don't want to see y'all here no more. Y'all want to have to move. That's it. I'm tired of it. And I would get around with the neighbors. We'll come up and we'll clean. We'll sit on the corner all day long. We'll stop the cars. We won't let the cars come by the drugs. We'll actually be sitting in the middle of the street, actually block the traffic, so then we'll come by here and buy drugs. We took over the corner, us sitting there 24 hours a day. Actually, we stood out there maybe till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, just sitting here, you know, making sure nobody would come over here and buy drugs. When the community got together, that's what made a difference. You know, State Street made a big difference, and the community pulled together, and I got involved with the Quakers.
Reverend Streeter bought the church across the street that was originally the meeting house.
I did not know the neighborhood was like it was when I came here, but I knew the Lord sent me here to do His work. I just had a vision that I wanted to start a youth ministry.
People were afraid to come to my church because of the neighborhood. They stole the batteries out of the cars, busted the windows, took out cell phones. When we were in here praising God, when it came out, people couldn't ride on, tires were busted.
I met Peaches, who is the woman that gets things together in this neighborhood.
And she was gathering on the corner of 9th and Indiana, having meetings so that they can take back our neighborhood. That's what she said. So I joined them, and the policemen were there. Then I opened my doors of the church, and they came in this church. The Quakers have been really a backbone to me. They had my back. We're a team now, and we're working to clean up this neighborhood and make this a place for our children to be safe. Well, you know, I believe that everything has to change for the better. And when you keep a strong, positive thought and that feeling in your heart that things have to get better, they do get better.
Because they fought so hard for justice, for peace, for equality. I think their legacy is an incredibly important one to carry forward.
My hope and my vision is that the children can come out again and play without worrying about being shot.
Now, oh my God, it is so beautiful. You can walk in the cemetery, there's no weed, there's no trash. We can get out the bus, come home, the kids can come outside and play. I mean, the ice cream trucks will come out here, my kids can play, I can enjoy, I can breathe. I see all my neighbors, it's beautiful. I mean, you don't see nobody in the corner, where they at? Where they at? They better not come around here.
They can go to the store and they be safe. They don't need to be worried about bullets flying around. You know, that's how it is. You know, I think my neighborhood is beautiful.
So the methodology for this is that there was one filmmaker who was an instructor, a facilitator, the filmmaker wasn't shooting. It was all done by members of the community production group. And also a humanities scholar that sort of guided them through research techniques, archives, fact-checking, oral history techniques, and things like that. And so, yeah, it sort of we're continuing the series, but yeah, that's a little bit of the Precious Places Project. And this group, this was actually an interesting one, because as you can see, there are actually three groups that came together. There were the Quakers, who were seeing themselves as a custodian of the burial ground, the church, with Reverend Streeter, and then Peaches Ramos, who is definitely a force of nature, who really is a civic community organizer. So the three all were involved in the production and also in the editorial control of the project. So yes, so I mentioned that we sort of had stopped for a while. So and these we do about 10 of these at a time at Scribe. And the other thing is with the community visions, which was the first model, which that model is about maybe a year, 10 months. The Precious Places are shorter, it's usually 6 months, and they really only get 1 day of primary shooting, as opposed to the community visions, they may have several weeks of shooting. And to kind of turn it into an event with the Precious Places, all 10 groups shoot on the same day. So it's really quite wonderful. You only really know it if you're connected with Precious Places, but on that day, like you're driving around different neighborhoods and you see these grandmothers saying, move, Dolly left, Dolly left. I mean, there's something, these, Cecil B. DeMille's or whatever. So it says these on the pavement. While we were working on the Precious Places project, there was one of the humanities scholars who's there to kind of help them with humanities content, and had said to me, this is a woman named Maris Gillette. Her day job was she was chair of the anthropology program at Haverford College, and it said, and she's from Iowa originally, and she was saying, it really strikes me how strong the Muslim community is in Philadelphia and how visible it is, compared to many, many other places in the United States. And growing up in Philadelphia, I'm aware of it, but in some ways you don't necessarily notice it. It really is an exceptional characteristic of Philadelphia. Even other parts of the U.S. that actually also have strong Muslim populations, like in the Detroit and the Michigan area, certainly in New York and Newark, there is a particular style of Philadelphia has a particular history as it relates to Islam. Be it African Americans who may have at one time been in the Nation of Islam, people who've come more recently to the U.S. from North Africa, West Africa, South Asia, Indonesia, the Caribbean, and also, Philadelphia has a very important Sufi community, which, interestingly, a large number of the people that converted to Sufism actually were European Americans, many Jewish folks who, in the 60s, so first went to Sufism for kind of spiritual meditation, and then became involved, and then understood that Sufism is actually a form of Islam. So we thought, and so as I was saying, that for the Precious Places, there was this confluence of things that made us think it was important to do something on this community history project. For Muslim Voices, certainly Philadelphia is a very important history in terms of Islam, but also the Islamophobia, which we also can take for granted because it's just so prevalent, and somehow this false characterization as if Islam was something new that began after 9/11, and in reality, Islam in the United States is as old as just about any other Western religion. It is. I mean, it goes back certainly to the 16th century. Islam in the U.S. is a very old thing. So we decided to try to do a community history project called Muslim Voices of Philadelphia, which was working with a variety of Muslim organizations, be they masjids, educational, cultural organizations, and let them tell their history as it relates to Islam. And we first did a prototype because in reality, doing a film about place in your neighborhood is really different than talking about your faith and how you come to it. And people feel differently about talking about their faith or not talking about their faith to talking about where they grew up. So I wanted to just show, and I'll talk a little bit more first. But the groups finished, although one group is still working, but we worked with 11 groups. The 11th group is still finishing. They should have finished in June of last year, but that's the thing with community media. You have to be patient and support it because people have complex lives and they're doing other things, and nobody's really getting paid to do this. They're doing it really as a way to talk about to share their story, again as a kind of discourse. And oftentimes it is, in the case of Muslim Voices, it's talking as much to the general public as it is talking to other Muslim groups in Philadelphia that may not necessarily see their particular approach to Islam as being true Islam or whatever. So there was a very much of an intra Muslim dialogue going on with this. So let me just try this one. I'm actually going to show one of the prototypes, one of the pilot projects that we did, because I like it, even though I think in terms of production values, it can be a little bit harsh, but I just love the storytelling. And it's called Seeds of Awakening.
That I am striving.
Incorporated, I believe, in 1926.
Masjid Muhammad of Philadelphia.
Sent him here.
Yeah, well, it's not off there. Oh, well, I'll play another one. Actually, one is. Yeah, I'll play. I'm going to play this one also.
What is interesting is that I left Cheney's campus on the day that Elijah Muhammad died. That's interesting. Because I'm on my car coming home, and I hear on the radio that the Honorable Elijah, this is 1975, had left the planet. Now, yeah, I remember if you were under this teaching, so I couldn't even imagine that Elijah Muhammad is dead. So I'm saying, oh, it's a conspiracy. But something inside of me said, no, this is not a conspiracy. This is the truth. I mean, it's like he passed, and you're hearing members of the family on the radio talking that the Honorable Muhammad had passed, and blase, and it's going on and on. I had to pull over. I was so emotional. I had to pull over. I had to pull over, cry, get that out of me, and then journey home. On the day I left Cheney's campus.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Elijah Muhammad, that preacher of freedom, justice, and equality. To you, my black brother and sisters.
The early lost foundation of Islam placed great value and emphasis on healthy eating, living a clean, decent, disciplined life with high morals, staying free from drugs, alcohol, and gang activity. The Nation of Islam reinforced ethnic pride and racial pride. They placed great emphasis on dressing modestly, emphasis on nationalism, self-sufficiency, and economic self-determination.
Well, first I got lured into my feeling by going to some bazaars, and then I heard about their sister selling Dennis, Muslim food, like the stuff we read about in Muhammad speaks and how they eat to live. So I kept tasting this Muslim food, and I was hooked.
I was hanging on the corner, drinking, gang worn, the whole bit. And people in my neighborhood, a few really bad guys accepted Islam, and I thought that anything that could change those guys had to be pretty powerful.
So I started reading the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, and I was interested. None of the rest of our friends were really going out, and at the time I actually read the Muhammad Speaks newspaper from cover to cover. I even memorized the back page of what the Muslims want and what the Muslims believe. So we felt that this was where we belong, in this community or in this new lifestyle of moving away from the gangs and the things that were going on back there in the middle late 60s. There were things going on all over the country, police brutality, all kinds of racial demonstrations and movements. Angela Davis, Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, riots and so forth and so on. But when we heard the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we started becoming more interested.
Historically, if we didn't go through the Nation of Islam, we wouldn't even be here.
I believe wholeheartedly in Honorable Elijah Muhammad. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be alive today. I know it.
There was Imam Worthy Muhammad, who was the son of Elijah Muhammad, who took Islam, traditional Islam, to the forefront of America and made Islam a name that is respected, a faith that is respected, and a belief system that is honored here in the African American community.
But the thing I did understand, even as a child, he said Islam is freedom, justice, and equality. And he used to have a drawing. When you walk into the temple, the first thing you saw was that drawing on that board. And it said Islam, freedom, justice, equality. Well, I understood that because I understood the African American people and our needs. I understood that we were discriminated against. I understood that we were not given full citizenship at that time. We weren't accorded full citizenship rights at that time. I knew that. So when he said Islam was freedom, justice, and equality, he spoke not so much as scripture to me, he spoke common sense to me. My father passed in February 1975.
All of us shared the same, I guess, basic reaction to the death of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And in fact, I can remember being taught as an FOI and times that we would have meetings or possible future that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we refer to him as the last messenger of Allah. What was amazing, I would use that as an adjective, to all of us was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad returned to Allah the day before what was a big event. In fact, the only one that we really had was Savior's Day. And every year, February the 26th, we would come and try to find our way to Chicago to hear the one lecture, the only lecture that we would hear from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as our leader. And we lost him the day before.
This was the time, the earlier part of the transition from the thinking of the Nation of Islam, which was more focused on racial identity, centering you so that you knew yourself as a black person, opposed to Sunni Islam, where you came into the Brotherhood of Islam, which incorporated all races, all ethnic groups.
One of the most, I would say, the most influential thing that I think Wahid Muhammad brought to us, and some people would say he brought bigger stuff than that, was when he gave us the name change. When he started calling us Bilalians. And why would Wahid Muhammad call us Bilalians? Of all the things to call us, he calls Bilalians. But if you study the life of the Prophet, you study who Bilal was, and he was an Abyssinian slave, you look at that and say, he looked like me.
He brought forth the life of Bilal.
Right.
And showed the connection between Bilal and our communities.
Right.
Coming from slavery.
Right.
Calling the people to prayer. Being a Muslim.
Right. Why would Wahid Muhammad choose Bilal when we know Wahid Muhammad studied? We know that for a fact. So if he studied, then he knew that. He knew who we were. We are the callers to prayer. We are the ones that have been emptied out. We came from Africa. We came out of Africa. We had whatever culture we had there. We was empty. We was brought to America. We was given Christianity. They emptied us out of everything. You didn't even have your name. You couldn't have anything. Now here we sit now in 2014 with names like Muhammad. I'm watching a basketball game the other night. There's a brother playing by the name of Ali Muhammad.
He also said, I can remember one night we were at the table after the meeting when he had come into office, that I had to make some changes, and that I went here to man means mind, because we had been referring to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as the last messenger of Allah, and that his teacher, W.D. Farad, was God in person. He said, so he went here to man means mind. He said, because you all wasn't ready.
Almost like fish out of water, because we didn't know really what to do. And that's when we started to mainstream, go towards mainstream Islam with the teachings of Wahid Muhammad and going to the masjids and attending Jummah and all that entailed.
So the transition was an effort by Imam W.D. Muhammad to bring us from the things that his father, W.D. Farad, had given to us in the Nation of Islam. It wasn't religion. He said we were Muslims, and he said that we should read Quran. But we didn't have Jummah on Fridays, as Muslims do, and the Quran teaches to have Jummah. We didn't fast in the month of Ramadan, as the Muslims did, okay, based on the lunar calendar. So there were things that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad did that showed us that he wasn't here to teach us Quran and Sunnah.
After the death of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, his son, Imam Wahid Muhammad, ushered in a new era. The lost foundation of Islam transitioned to universal Islam as practiced around the world and embraced the 5 pillars of Islam, which are belief in the oneness of God, prayer 5 times a day, giving in charity, fasting during the month of Ramadan, and making Hajj pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca at least once in a lifetime. They also began to embrace a new sense of interfaith fellowship and unity with other faith communities. They also embraced a new spirit of patriotism and a new sense of citizenship.
My name was Tyrone James. Before I changed it, I actually changed my name in the Army in 1982 while I was stationed in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. The Imam expressed the allegiance to the Muslim community as to encourage them to get more involved in the government.
Right.
Because at that time, people were so anti. And, you know, anti-establishment was still carrying over from the 60s.
Right.
All until the 60s, so it was still in the mindset of a lot of people. Not realizing that we're not going anywhere. This is our country. Our ancestors labored hard for this, for us to be where we are.
Right.
So when I heard, you know, the Imam, you know, speaking the way that he felt about going into the military, I embraced it with open arms. And we gave me a letter, documentation, take this back to your commander and ask them, can you represent the Muslims in the military at the same time? So I took the documentation to my commander. He says, take this to the chaplain. I took it to the chaplain. The chaplain says, well, I have to sign off on it because you have a right, according to Article so-and-so, and you have a right to practice your religion. So thus, the military agreed with the Muslim Student Association of Hawaii at the time, thus making me the first Muslim representative for the military in 1982, way before they had chaplains.
The thing that made Imam Muhammad unique, he had the capacity to take the lessons that Elijah Muhammad had, that we had been orientated to and studied, and then he began to reinterpret the lessons. And with his reinterpretation of the lessons, giving us a whole different insight and perception. See, he first came in office, he was teaching psychology. You know, everybody thought they were psychologists for a while there, right? The Imam was talking all about the divine mind, the way he helped us to graduate from physicalized material thinkers to come to recognize transcendent spirituality.
But since this was an experiment in democracy, we here today to say that that experiment continues and America continues to move toward the more perfect unity because the Muslims, we have to challenge those who say that Islam does not have a place in these Americas.
But it took a process. And he, like a skillful doctor, knew how to perform that kind of surgery. And he did it.
Today's Jumu'ah services out in public gave the public an opportunity to tourists from all over the world, from all of America and all the world for that matter, in this tourist area here, now can actually go back and be honest with themselves. If someone say to them, what do you think of the Muslims? Well, they all not the same. I saw some very peaceful Muslims, or I saw Muslims in a very positive position. And there's no other position more positive than you can be in, any human being, especially a Muslim, than to be in a position of prayer. And so they witnessed our prayer service, and they showed, and our prayer service shows how humble and how we break our bodies down, standing, bending, bowing, and putting the best part of us, our minds, our heads, on the ground in reverence to, and worship to Almighty God.
So this blackboard tells the story of how Islam got its footing in the African American community because it was part of a freedom struggle to help liberate our people. And if people don't have that kind of spirit today that is embracing this religion, they're missing a very important ingredient that was a part of the African American experience.
Actually the second piece made by this group. The first one was really about why people joined the Nation of Islam, which is why I wanted to show that. This is a So we're now sort of packaging these, and they'll be cable casts and broadcasts hopefully later this year. So yeah, so that's the main the main work from Scribe. I should say that I'm actually my own work right now. I'm actually working on a film about Tony K. Bambara, which I showed a little bit of a clip earlier of a very short film I did, kind of a commission piece for Princeton on Toni Morrison. And one of the reasons I actually did that gig was to get the interview with Morrison for the Tony K. Bambara film, which will help me. And Morrison knew that, so it kind of helped me raise some money to make that film. So I don't know if folks have any questions or, but yeah, that's my talk. Sure.
Okay, we're experimenting with community engaged learning. Can you talk about best practices or what you do that you think works? Because I really like this idea. You said you have a filmmaker with them for 10 months, and then you have a scholar. It seems really helpful. And then that's a larger question. Who edits?
These pieces, it depends. I would say if it's going to be 10 months, it's enough time to train the members of the community group how to use Premiere, or Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro, and they can kind of, and maybe in the beginning there'll be the facilitator, the production facilitator will be there. When they're shorter length pieces, like some of the Precious Places were done in 3 months, most were like 6 months. In that case, the production facilitator may actually be the person with their hands on the buttons, but it's required that members of the group be there while the cut goes on. We really like, for all of our programs, including our youth programs, for the young people or the community participants to edit it. Because as you know, as a filmmaker, such a critical part of the authoring process comes with with kind of editing. That's really where you're structuring. That's where you're making the film. So it's in the best of all worlds, the community groups cut it. I'd also say that the whole process of community media, and sometimes we reject humanities scholars who want to work with us. And sometimes we reject filmmakers that work with us. And I'll tell you why. The usual reason, well, let me do the positive before I do the negative. So the positive is we feel that, one must feel a sense of connection to one's community. Not one must. One does feel a sense of connection to one's community. So if you have a skill, if you have a knowledge, then share it. And specifically if that knowledge can make the community stronger. And I think a lot of the struggles, and I guess although I wasn't quite an adult during the 60s, but I certainly was around during the 60s. But part of the struggles of the 60s was how do we make communities stronger? How do we use our talents to make the community stronger? So part of the process is really putting yourself at the service of the community, not in a patronizing kind of way, but in a way that where the community decides what is most important to them. And I find that there's seldom, like for Muslim Voices, you would think, oh, there could be some real butting heads. Because we said from the beginning, we're not making theological treaties. They're histories of the group. You're not going to, we're not, this project is not about conversion, trying to get people to become Muslim. It's really about the history of the group. Nobody's arguing with that. People are, we all are reasonable. So anyway, so putting oneself at service, I think, makes us all stronger. It's out of our self-interest that we do that. The negative thing is I find that with community media, oftentimes, sometimes filmmakers with very little or no experience, let's say, this will happen where maybe somebody who is just, maybe, let's say, I'm not knocking sophomores, but let's say somebody's like a sophomore in college and say, oh, I really want to facilitate this community group and I really want to teach them. And the people I try to get are working filmmakers, maybe an MFA, or an MFA, people who have some real skills to teach. Because the community deserves the best. They don't deserve, somebody who's learned something on Monday trying to teach them on Friday. They really deserve the best. And the problem, and I do believe those people of commitment and good conscience are there.